as I sat in this house and as Parliament rolled on into the fourth day, I recognize there is an approach to presentation in the Parliament, beginning, of course, with the leader of the opposition who made his presentation. And so I rise to give my full and unequivocal support to the budget for 2019/2018. And at the outset, Mr. Speaker, I must admit that I am a bit perplexed. I am perplexed, Mr. Speaker, because having listened to the leader of the opposition in particular, I began wondering in which country he lives. His presentation, and of course subsequent presentation, all of them, show them to me, Mr. Speaker, as a discombobulated bunch of opposition leaders.
Oh, well, that's for your time.
And so, Mr. Speaker, they seem to want to use the Parliament to win public support for another term in government, based on statements made in particular by the leader of the opposition. And in doing that, Mr. Speaker, I heard some vain attempts to manipulate the facts, vain attempt to manipulate the figures, and even in some cases, they were spouting outright lies. And so, Mr. Speaker, as a result of that, I became perplexed. I said, Mr. Speaker, I became perplexed. And that also is because it was only a few weeks ago in this Parliament, in this very chamber, having listened to their presentations on the opposition benches, I had drawn the conclusion that they were having an epiphany. And I told them so in this chamber, that they were having an epiphany. But today, Mr. Speaker, I have to admit, I was wrong. They were having an epiphany, that's true. It was not a spiritual epiphany, that's what I said, but I was wrong. I have concluded that we are dealing with people whose souls are dead.
I wait on that one.
Dracula
I wait on that one.
Their souls are dead, Mr. Speaker. And to be quite frank, the reason I became perplexed is when I listened, it made me go back to some of the days of the literature that we learned in school. I'm sure you remember some of them, Mr. Speaker. I recall, for example, our learnings from Great Expectation. I'm sure you remember, Mr. Speaker, such characters as Jogargery and Pip and Pumblechook. I'm sure you remember some of those, Mr. Speaker. It made me go back into my literature. And I was recalling things like Beggar Man, that you should come crawling into my yard, arms outstretched, ragged and odorous, begging, go away. I was recalling, Mr. Speaker, some of that literature. I even recall, Mr. Speaker, elegy written in a country churchyard. You know? And you recall those, I'm sure you were in school those days when you recall some of those literature. I recall Banana Man, tourist white man wiping his face, met me in Golden Grove Marketplace, look at me old clothes brown with stain, and soaked right through with the Portland rain. I'm sure you remember the literature, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure you remember how they brought the good news from Ghent to Aix. Gallop, I'm sure you remember all of that. But you know the one that I remember, and I want you to remember, and I want the opposition leader to remember, is the one that was written by Sir Walter Scott. Are you familiar with it, Mr. Speaker? The Lay of the Last Minstrel, my native land. Breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself have said, this is my land, my native land, Dominica is. Whose heart hath near within him burned, as home his footstep he has turned from wandering on a foreign strand, Dominica. If such there be, go mark him well. For him no minstrel raptures swell. High though his titles, proud his name, boundless his wealth, and wish can claim, despite those titles, power, and pelf, the wretch concentrate all himself. That's what my mind went back to, Mr. Speaker. The wretch concentrate all in self. Living shall forfeit fair renown, and doubly dying shall go down to the vile dust from whence he sprung. Unwept, unhonored, and unsung. That's what my mind went back to, Mr. Speaker, because I could not believe what I was hearing from the leader of the opposition. It seemed to me, Mr. Speaker, that from the last house of an epiphany to a point where he was so forgetful, as described by the Honourable Member for number 10, conveniently, that I could only describe him as dead. Breathes there a man with soul so dead. That's what I recall, Mr. Speaker. It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that this leader of the opposition is looking for his last hurrah. He seemed to miss it. Looking for his last hurrah. That soul, Mr. Speaker, has to be dead. And dead for a long time. Because if that soul was not dead and dead for a long time, we in this Team Unity government would not have had to be battling so hard to remedy, to find remedies for all of the mismanagement, corruption, and in some cases direct lining of pockets by those who ran the government. They, Mr. Speaker, built up a debt so crippling that every taxpayer in this nation, even the unborn child, was soaking in debt when they had at least 15 years in government. If their souls were not dead, Mr. Speaker, and had not been dead for a long time, we would not have had to be working so hard to recover our patrimony. 1,700 acres of land poofed away, while those who were in power illegitimately enriching themselves were working for a legitimate 10 cents an hour and yet became multi-billionaires. Yes, Mr. Speaker, at the same time they were enriching themselves. Hundreds of petitions and divisions remain wallowing in crappy circumstances. I say crappy circumstances, some of them without water and sanitary facilities in their homes. Some of them on the leaky roof have to move the bed around whenever rain falls. Even if dew falls, they have to move the bed.
Oh, Lord. Dew and all.
And that is what they had in this country. and had people living through. If their souls were not so dead and dead for a long time, Mr. Speaker, our country would not have been exposed to $200 million. $200 million loaned to institutions that is supposed to be foreign direct investors. Loaned to these institutions without any security whatsoever. While Joe in Keyon,
what kind of responsibility is that?
who want to borrow $5,000,
About unsecured thing.
who want to borrow $5,000, can't get the same $5,000 to borrow. When organizations, two of them, could get over $100,000 each, unsecured.
And you can't get five.
From local people, money. And my friend Joe, who had a little thing to deal with because he had a health problem, can't get $5,000. They want to see what all under his bed. How much girlfriend he had. What kind of clothes in the closet. Can't get $5,000. That is how this country was run. We ordinary poor people who they call upon to vote every election could not get $5,000 to borrow, except you strip off all your clothes. While at the same time, two foreign direct investors in this country who should bring money in the country allowed to borrow $100 million each, allowed to use $100 million each without any kind of security. Mr. Speaker, I have about 20 matters, you know.
Talk long, man.
About 20 matters to deal with. 20 matters, I call them 20 indictments. But I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try and stay within an hour and a half. And so, I will just deal with 3 of them. After which I will expound on our journey to implement the fourth most significant decision any government can make that changes the quality of life in a country. I will speak, of course, to universal health. Time permitting, Mr. Speaker, I will then look at some of the achievements and plans in housing and agriculture and fishing and health and some constituency matters. So, Mr. Speaker, I return to the crippling debt of $3 billion within the first 15 years of that administration. When they came to power in 1995, there was a debt they claimed in the budget addressed by the Prime Minister then, member for number 6, of $200 million. That's what the debt was. That's what he said the debt was. And when you looked around the country, Port Zante was built. Southeast Peninsula Road was built. CFBC was built. Kim Collins Highway was built. This building was already refurbished and extended, government headquarters. Am I missing any? I mean, they could explain the $200 million. 10% of what was done, because nothing has been done since in this country. What do you have any note?
Come on, man. Come on.
And so, Mr. Speaker, that was done ready as we went into the elections, and they won the elections. That's what they meant when they came in office. And what happened? I believe in a previous meeting, Mr. Speaker, I spoke to all of the deficits that they chalked up. But what was clear, unequivocal, unchallenged, using some of the words that they use, truths that cannot be condemned, is that in 15 years under the former leader, The debt moved from 200 million to near 3,000 million. That is 1,500% increase in a short time, 15 years. But for you to understand, Mr. Speaker, let's put this in figures so that the ordinary man on the street could understand what we faced. Because that decision, you know, Mr. Speaker, caused this country to go to the IMF, to be under structural adjustment. Public servants couldn't get increments. That debt and the decision that followed that debt caused some churches to lose half of the money which they had with the government. Brimstone Hill, TDC, what they call it? Haircut. Haircut. Slashed people's monies in half. When you have money with the government, you're supposed to feel the safest, that's the safest place, you know. But with this government that was in office, 50% of the money disappeared. Poofed. And the other 50% they say you can't get it for 40 years. 40 years, you know.
That disappeared too.
Half disappear, you ain't have it no more. And the other half, you can only get in 40 years' time. That is the situation that they created in this country. So let me put it in dollar terms for you. If in 1995, the debt of the country was $200 million, and we were called upon to pay the debt, and every individual was to put a sum of their own money to pay the debt, everybody would have had to put $4,000. Let me repeat it for people to understand, because I'm speaking for the people out there to understand when the member for number 6 could come in here and tell people, return to labor. If in 1995, the debt he said the country had of $200 million were to be called in for the people of the state to pay because the state can't pay, the state would have to ask the 50,000 people to give them $4,000 each, and they would have paid the $200 million debt. 15 years later, the debt go to 3,000 million. If the state was called upon to pay its debt because it couldn't pay, and the country had to ask each of us to give them money to pay off the debt, you would have to find $60,000. So the child who just born in the hospital yesterday would have had to find $60,000. That is what they did with the debt.
That is not how you meant it.
They chalked up a debt from 200 million to 3,000 million. And I don't want to say joker. The gentleman who represents number 3, the member for number 3, is going to say that's not how you met it. I couldn't make it that way. If you throw away half of the people money and then tell them they're going to get the other half for the next 40 years. That is true. That is what it is. So don't make any comment because your comment is not worth it. Your comment means zero, nothing. It's like you do an exam and get not. So don't argue about that. Don't make any bones about that.
Why are you angry, sir?
The crippling debt, why are you talking nonsense?
Why are you angry?
$3,000 million. $3,000 million. $60,000 a man if they had to pay off the country's debt. That is Labour's track record.
Unavoidable.
That is the record of the member for number 6.
Irrefutable.
A man who come in here to urge the country to make him Prime Minister again. No way, Jose.
Say your name, Jose.
Listen. There's a tide in the affairs of men, taken at the flood, leads to fortune. It is that which inspired the Honourable Member for number 9 to move a motion of no confidence in 2012.
Yes.
Because there is a tide in the affairs of men, taken at the flood, leads to fortune. Can anybody in St. Kitts and Nevis say that having fortune? We are having fortune because of the vision of people like the Honourable Member for number 9. There is a tide in the affairs of men, taken at the flood leads to fortune. That is why Dr. Harris stepped out and that had come in at this. That is why.
The ship was leaking.
Because he recognized if he got to perish, he will perish. But he can change course because there's a tide in the affairs. And listen now, the tide is still rising, you know. It ain't subsided. Your tide has subsided.
The tide never came.
And so this tide is rising. And so there's no hope of this person returning to be king again. And let's talk about the land for debt swap. The land for debt swap was another outgrowth, another travesty,
You people say you're going to lose too.
another travesty of the level of corruption and governance, bad poor governance by the former administration. We came to Parliament. I was on the opposition benches. They made the Parliament believe that we were just putting 1,200 acres of land in a vehicle.
Yes.
1,200 acres.
That's what was disclosed to the nation.
That's what they said to the country. Lo and behold, when we get in office, it's 1,700 acres. They didn't tell us about the next 5. Poof, there were 1,200 acres of land into an investment vehicle where poor people like me can't buy. Well, I know that some people are rich, they're building houses on the hill,
I don't know about that.
and big and powerful houses, $1 million houses,
Capice and Bass.
Capice and Bass.
Oh, wow. Things have been good in Capice.
I know that, right?
Why? Under this government, everybody get a fair share.
We were told, Mr. Speaker, about 1,200 acres of land that was put in this vehicle. In fact, when it was done and the debate was being held in this chamber, the member for number 6 said, poof, they poofed away the land. Poof, poofed away the land. Mr. Speaker, the land that went into that investment vehicle, the 1,200 acres, at the time when they put it in, it was to cover a debt of $900 million in National Bank that they couldn't pay. National Bank was on the verge of bankruptcy.
Really or no? It's now.
And that is why, Mr. Speaker,
It is now.
they puffed the land into that investment vehicle.
It is now, so it's bankrupt.
And so here, Mr. Speaker, I want to just let the people of St. Kitts know. $900 million for 1,200 acres of land mean it was $750,000 an acre. That's what they did, which means $17 per square foot. You could buy it. I can't buy it.
That's not meant for them.
$17 per, maybe Capice and Bass could buy it. $17 a square foot.
Not a soul as in here could afford.
But Max, not meant for
You know what it reminds me of, Mr. Speaker? It reminds me of the mighty sparrow. Capitalism gone mad.
Yeah, man.
$60,000, $70,000 for a piece of land. 4,000 square feet. Multiply it, you see. It's about $70,000 for a little piece of land.
House plot.
If you want to take it out of that land for that swap thing. A little house lot.
Our government.
17. And then I told you that they didn't tell you it was 1,700 acres. So here they were saying 12. It turns out that it was 1700 because they took another 5 out of Sandy Point. Poor Sandy Point. Poor Sandy Point.
But you have no passenger.
Sandy Point has nowhere to go, Sandy Pointers.
Where you put 6
And they were trying to put Sandy Pointers way down in the country.
You use the 6 census land.
And so, Mr. Speaker, 1,700 acres, that is actually 74,052,000 square feet. That is 1,700 acres, 74,052,000 square feet. If you divide that by 4,000 square feet, in other words, a little house lot. A little house lot, you know. They were responsible in their time of puffing away 18,513 house lot. Which means 18,513.
Wow.
Which means, Mr. Speaker, the young person in K1 who was asking me yesterday for land.
Yeah, they have a problem.
They have a problem because the former administration puffed away 18,513 house lot.
And that is such a thing. 4%.
And that is why the people in Connery who would meet me and say, Mr. Minister, I want a piece of land, and I have to tell them, we have to hold it. They can't get it because of the conduct of the previous administration. 18,513 lots of land. So the policeman who want a piece of land and can't get it, it is their fault. And yet the leader come here Thursday to tell you, come back to Labour. Give him another chance to be Prime Minister. And member for number 3 following him.
People like bad treatment here.
I know member for number 11 following him. But member for number 3 following him. 18,513. You know, Mr. Speaker, you know what is really, really troubling about that? This man led a Labour government. The same Labour government headed by Bradshaw, that was run by Bradshaw, whom they revere. The poor man wants his soul to rest, and this land business have the man's soul can't rest. Can't rest, the man's soul can't rest because of that. Because in 1975, don't forget, you know, in 1975, there was a Land Acquisition Act that took the lands away. Well, return the lands, let me not say took it away. Return the lands for the use of this country to benefit ordinary people who are doing labor type work. That's what it was, Mr. Speaker.
Which you oppose?
So, Mr. Speaker, during that build-up and swapping, some fellas that we know who were in government moved from rag to riches while they were only making $30 an hour. They moved from rags to billionaires. Some get the house rent pay, the house bill duty free, and then get the house rent pay from the treasury. They have a house in Bird Rock, and they get it paying US dollars. And they never live in it one day. They never lived in it one day. Rent out. Listen here, they govern so badly. I don't want to say they're corrupt. That here is a man getting an opportunity to build his first home where he's supposed to live duty free. That was the deal.
That's a killer, man.
And after the house done built, they rent it back to the government.
That's a killer.
Yes.
Back to the government.
That's a killer, man.
Never lived in it a day.
But his name was not the thing. That's just.
And come in this parliament to talk about give them another chance.
A killer that you
Are you going to defend that number 3? Sing about that.
Say that again.
Sing about that.
You ain't want me singing, when I sing, people listen. You know,
I got a song on Caprice and Bass Boy. Wait.
where are you reading?
It coming.
Oh, I just got it off.
Mr. Speaker,
Big tune.
Talk.
Caprice and Bass.
while they were lying in their pockets, Mr. Speaker,
It feels so.
over 600 householders in this country had no bathroom. No bathroom, no toilet, no running water. The houses were leaking. The galvanized rotten off. The shingles rip off from hurricane. And they wouldn't help them. It is why they don't like our roof program, you know. You remember? They don't like it because now we fix a lot of those people's roof. They don't like it at all. They so hate poor people getting anything. They start to bash the program. That's what they're doing, bashing the program. And yet the man with his soul so dead come here in this parliament to urge you to make him prime minister again. Let me tell you again, no way, Jose. So how will Team Unity address the land scarcity problem? Many of you who are listening to my voice today, I know I'm bombarded. You have applied for land. You have not been successful. And you're not being successful because this government does not want to help you, but because the former administration has puffed it away, had put it in a vehicle where you cannot reach, and has made land scarce in this country. The same land that was acquired by Robert Bradshaw back in 1975. So how are we going to address it, Mr. Speaker? The budget, Mr. Speaker, at paragraph 137, speaks to how we're going to address it, because when we were in opposition, you know, we said we were going to repeal this act. But when you came to office and realized that these people had debt all up in your throat,
you never
can't pay anything,
you never intended to.
Can't do anything at all. People lending money to people, $200 million without security. You realize prudence had to abide. And so how we're going to address it? We're going to address it, Mr. Speaker, and it says at paragraph 137, we intend to roll out a plan for the redemption of lands committed under the land for debt swap.
Yes.
That is how we're going to address it.
Yes.
Starting 2019.
Yes.
The initial areas to be considered in the land redemption program includes Sandy Point. So hey, Sandy Pointers, y'all gonna get looked after, boy.
Sandy Point.
Team Unity helping. Team Unity coming to the rescue of the Sandy Pointers.
Yes.
It's a good thing that the other Deputy Prime Minister is from Sandy Point, you know. Because now Sandy Pointers will see how these things work. And then the other area is Keon.
Oh yes.
Mr. Speaker, I feel like jumping up.
Oh, you sold that out there. You already sold
Keon, Mr. Speaker.
You sold it.
Where they took 400 acres and put it in that investment vehicle.
You sold the land in Keon.
People of number 8.
Yes. Those of you who are listening in Keon, hear what I say. We're taking back some of the land starting in 2019.
Yes.
So you will get land.
Yes.
And Lodge area. Those of you in Lodge, who in the Prime Minister constituency, the Prime Minister looking out for you. The government will purchase the land in the shortest possible time starting 2019. We believe that we are duty-bound to preserve the patrimony of our people. The good people of Sandy Point, Keon, and Lodge, and the rest are assured that this Team Unity government will do its absolute best when it comes to securing public assets in their interest. Mr. Speaker, when this land was put in the investment vehicle, the former leader said, "Puffed away." Now we have the Team Unity government. It's saying we're taking it back, and we're bringing it back to the people of St. Kitts and in where possibly Nevis.
And recently that was...
You know, Mr. Speaker, when I was on the benches of the opposition, I raised questions of the executive branch of government. And one of the questions I raised with the then executive branch was the SIDF question. I remember asking the Honorable Minister of Finance a question about SIDF. And you remember that? And his response to me was, basically, well, you asked me about SIDF. They're a private company. Yeah. You're not going to ask me nothing. That's how I characterize what he said anyway. Not ask me nothing. Well, The member for St. Christopher 6 supported and piloted the acquisition of 852 acres of land in the Southeast Peninsula. Follow me. He piloted a bill and acquisition of 852 acres of land in the Southeast Peninsula. In that 852 acres was an amount of 175 acres belonged to a Kittian named Dr. Beard. His friend. His buddy friend. He even said it here Thursday. Yes, he's my friend. He took my friend land, you know, and caused the friend land to be acquired and sold to an organization, part of that 852 acres for $17 million. And turn around there and sit down there, tell them, call Dr. Beard, his friend. Poor Dr. Beard up to now ain't getting the money. Up to now. And he said Dr. Beard is his friend. He sell out his friend. A man who sells out his friend sold dead for $17 million. Because he was then concentrating all in self. Let me go back to it here, buddy. Breathe there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself have said, this is my land, my native land. You reach in time. Whose heart hath never within him burned, as home his footstep he had turned. I know you're good. If be there such a man, go mark him well. For him no minstrel raptures swell. High though his title, proud his name, boundless his wealth, as wish can claim. Despite those titles, power and pelf, the wretch concentrated all in self. Living shall forfeit fear renown, and doubly dying shall go down to the wild dust from whence he sprung. Unwept, unhonored, and unsung. As
all for one member.
And so, Mr. Speaker, when I was on those benches and I asked about SIDF, he refused to answer. I must go look for it myself. I mean, I never expected that. I should have expected it. But I didn't. I expected him to be honorable and to answer honorably. But he didn't answer honorably. And the reason I'm raising it, Mr. Speaker, is because the 852 acres, which was sold for $17 million to a foreign direct investor who's supposed to bring money in the country to develop the country, they ended up getting $100 million of our money without any security. Under that farmer administration, 100 million. While my friend who was sick, who wanted $5,000, had to tell them what color his sheet be on the bed and can't get it. And that is what has happened. And it's not just that person alone got 100 million, you know. They bring another project. This is our money, you know. SIDF money, you know. Called Kittian Hill, you know. Another $100 million. Another $100 million of local people money. And local people can't get to borrow anything. $100 million under that administration. And then the member comes here in this parliament and asks him to be returned as Prime Minister again. No way, Jose. No way. So the $100 million, Mr. Speaker, was offered to these two foreign direct investors who you expect to bring money in the country. And there was no security. And yet, Mr. Speaker, we are asked to go back. Let me say it again, because he wasn't here. Let me say it for you. There is a tide in the affairs of men. Taken at the flood leads to fortune. That's why Mark Brantley brought the motion of no confidence. There is no tide for your motion that you bring. So it can't lead to no fortune for you. You understand? The tide is rising here, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, you may have thought it was a mistake. But like I said, they did the same thing again with Petition Hill. And at Petition Hill, you know, Mr. Speaker, you know what is so egregious, Mr. Speaker? At Petition Hill, they had people down there working for $80,000 a month. You hear what I tell you, Mr. Speaker? 80 grand a month. And there was no income coming in down there. $80,000 a month. And you see how they answer it? They can't answer, so they start to divert the thing, the point. Look somewhere else. Can't answer why $80 million was paid to people down there when there was no income in the organization. And that is how they answer it. By telling you, look there. Don't look there. Look exactly to what you have done in this country. And while that was going on, Mr. Speaker, I'm supposed to remind you about this and remind the people. While that was going on, $11 million left this treasury and went in the hands of scams and vagabonds. You don't believe me? You put your up in the ear, Mr. Speaker. It's true. Let me tell you how it goes. There were some things called hydrofoils, right? That is about 30 years ago. The people who were involved were the Italians. Since the Second World War, there has been so much corruption in the Italian government. That government done change over 50 times. Because they're corrupt. Right? They claim that St. Kitts owed them money. Money which had a guarantor in England. The bank. Can you imagine, Mr. Speaker? They say we owe them 100 million. And there is so much corruption. Nobody was suing nobody in court. As a matter of fact, when you read the report, it says there was no action brought anywhere in England or in Italy or anything against the St. Kitts government. No legal claim for the money. But in 2007, the Honourable Member for number 6, in his capacity as Minister of Finance, December 2007, $2 million was just paid to who we don't know. Proof to line somebody's pocket. And then the following January 2008, another 2 million. See, you see how you answer the question? Oh, don't look here, look there. Look there, man. Look there. In January 2008, another $2 million for the same thing. $4 million paid to line the pockets of scams and vagabonds, which should not have been paid to anybody. Can't deny it, you know. Because when this scandal broke and everybody was running away from the question, when the member for number 9 raised the question, all of them ran away from it, and he wasn't here on the island. The Attorney General ran from it, the press, everybody ran from the question. And then he ran home. He ran home. Well, he ran back to St. Kitts, because I don't think he was treating St. Kitts as his home. He came back to St. Kitts and said, yes, the people have said that all the money was not, the thing is settled. Anybody has settled $100 million for 11 million?
If you ain't getting none, for 30 years.
He went to line people's pocket.
If you ain't getting none for 30
and I wonder if some of the people who pocket get line sitting in here. I wonder that.
That is what you believe.
Went to line people's pocket. $11 million. Up to now, no one really knows where that money went to. $11 million. Mr. Speaker, I am saying, here we've had someone running this government who has concentrated all in self and did not care what happened about the death of this country. who authorized the loans of money to people, $100 million at a time, without any security, who authorized $11 million to be paid to settle an imaginary debt. $11 million. And you know, there was a smartness to, you know, Mr. Speaker, because the December, $2 million US went to pay this debt. In January 2008, $2 million went to pay this debt. And later in 2008, they made the minister here, the Prime Minister, Minister of Finance. They were trying to make it look as if he had something to do with it. So he gave him Minister of Finance for 1 year, 2008 to 2009. But it turned out that in 2008, 2009 was the best financial year we had during that period. And so he took it back. He took back finance again the next year. That is how he did it. In front here, you know, Mr. Speaker, I don't have to lie on him. And the honourable member, I don't have to lie on him. And he can't refute it because he knows it's true. He knows it's true. That is exactly what happened.
All your bad debts, all your pound government bad debts is what we have to settle.
And now, Mr. Speaker,
yes, you don't know. Ask him.
Having used this parliament to try to make people believe that he's gone through some metamorphosis, he hasn't even begged pardon yet. Sorry for what I did. But wants to fool people to come back to them. My grandmother used to tell me, Mr. Speaker, if you can't fool Fan, how you going to fool Joe? You ever hear that, Mr. Speaker? Fan and Joe are brother and sister. And if you want to fool Joe, Joe will say, if you can't fool Fan, how you can fool Joe? Came to this parliament and want to fool Joe. And can't fool Fan. That is what has happened under this administration, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I did say I would try and stay within my time. So I want to turn to universal health. Part of what should happen in 2019. Because, Mr. Speaker, when I took office, I saw documentation where the government then, after 20 years almost, was considering introducing universal health. I have the documentation and I know what their plan was. And when I began to pay attention to it and study it, I realized, Mr. Speaker, that we had to go back to the drawing board. Not because what they were saying was so totally bad, but you had to go back to the drawing board. And this is why I'm looking for the support when the time comes. Because I want to see which of them will not support universal health. You see? Because like I said, I have the documentation. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, I realized we have to go back to the drawing board. Why? I did not want, still do not want, for universal health to be introduced in this country and people think it's a Hamilton thing. Because it's not no Hamilton thing. Mr. Speaker, understand me. There are 4 times in our history, maybe more, but I want to look at 4. 3 and this one like 4. 3 times before this one, where decisions made at the administrative level, of course with the people's support, have changed the course of history, have changed the quality of life of people. People have benefited, yes, and there was resistance, and there will be resistance to this one, but those times they changed the course of history and changed the quality of life. The first one, Mr. Speaker, I want to refer to is what I referred to earlier, which is the acquisition of the sugar lands. The acquisition of the sugar lands was a signal moment, a decision in this country, which has changed the quality of life of this people in this country. Because up to today, significant revenue is earned from the same land, which was acquired in 1975. Am I wrong? Tell them no. That's a signal decision. It was a decision, and yes, people would have spoken against it. That's true. But years forward, you see, the second one, Mr. Speaker, which has impacted the quality of life of people in this country, a signal decision, was when Provident Fund was terminated and you created what you call the Social Security. Today, Mr. Speaker, there are hundreds of persons in this country, the only income they have is Social Security. That was a signal decision affecting the quality of life of people in this country. It is a signal decision. The third one, Mr. Speaker, was when PAM NRP abolished personal income tax. And it had a lot of naysayers, plenty naysayers. But the abolition of personal income tax, Mr. Speaker, was one of those signal moments. And I will tell you why. The way the code was written then, the minute you reach to $2,000 a month, the percentage of your income tax was 55%. You could go back and look it up, it's there. Which means at $2,000 a month, $1,100 was going in income tax. And that was abolished in the 80s, which put money back in people's pocket. And some people, for the first time, began to feel $100 bills. And for the first time, realized they could own a piece of the rock and build their own home. It was the first time that people had an opportunity to make some of the most significant investments. That was a signal moment, a decision by PAM NRP that changed the quality of life of the people in this country. The next one, Mr. Speaker, is this one, which we're going to make in 2019. That universal health insurance coverage is one of those national decisions, signal decisions that will change the quality of life of people in this country. And let me explain why. Mr. Speaker, if I'm your brother and I have two kids, 10 years and 8 years old, I'm your brother. And God forbid I'm taken away from those two children. They're still 10 and 8. You have a responsibility, you know, Mr. Speaker, because you ain't supposed to stop and see those children go down to the dust. So can you imagine one of those children, something happened which requires serious medical intervention, whether here or abroad, and they ain't got it? They don't have it? You know what will happen, Mr. Speaker? People can turn their eyes on you. You're not the father, it's true. But it is you they're going to watch. Well, I mean, I help them if your family not help them. That's what they're going to say. So you have a responsibility, despite they're not your children. And I'm saying, let's look at the broader picture. Because in this country, in this nation, we have people who really cannot afford some of the things, some of the cost of medical care. Example, Mr. Speaker. You know how much it costs to do hemodialysis right here in St. Kitts? $125,000 a year. And I mean every year. It's not 1 year. It is why, Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, I engaged Taiwan's Veterans General and got them to set up a program in this country where they will train our nurses and doctors in Taiwan, and they have a management team here that helps to train them here, nurses, everyone, so that at the point of service at the health centers, there can be early diagnosis of persons who are at risk. That was introduced 3 years ago.
That is not true.
Under my watch.
That is not true.
So that you will know that you are at risk, and then you can be guided, maybe through diet and otherwise,
That is not true.
that you are a person at risk, and reduce the incidence of you becoming chronically ridden with kidney failure. And that is not going to happen, you know. Mr. Speaker, 25 years ago, like 3 or 4 people you used to hear have a kidney problem. Today, the register have on over 100 people who are affected in some way. That program, Mr. Speaker, that I just spoke about, has recently, just this year, about a month ago, delivered 3 new machines at the hospital to be able to help people who have need of the use of these machines. Hemodialysis, Mr. Speaker.
We didn't have hemodialysis before?
Hemodialysis costs about $125,000 a year. And I know there are lots of people, thousands of people in this country who will not be able to pay for those services. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, you hear me talking about universal health. Mr. Speaker, do you know how many people come down with cancer? Let me tell you 2 stories, Mr. Speaker. You may have heard one of them before. But there's a young man from Keys. His name was Livingston Griffin. At 34 years old, Livingston Griffin had an operation. Removed a bit of his intestines, and it was a great job well done. He was out of hospital, he was walking around. But, Mr. Speaker, he was told, you have to do chemotherapy. You see, we have a chemo lab now up at the hospital, Mr. Speaker. We do that now. But at that time, he was told, you have to do 21 cycles of chemotherapy. And you will have to go to Trinidad for those treatments. The cost that was quoted to him was over $30,000 US. Mr. Speaker, poor Livingston Griffin. His family poor, they're in Keys. He was a fisherman, he couldn't do his work. Well, he was sick. And poor Livingston Griffin used to walk the streets with a sheet of paper asking for a contribution. And I know there were plenty of people who used to frown on him. You know, don't bother with him. And I saw Livingston Griffin, Mr. Speaker, who could not access those chemotherapy treatments, pine away a very painful death at age 34. When I think of that, Mr. Speaker, I can't think of how we could avoid having universal health coverage in this country. I can't think of why we can't have it. Because no poor person is supposed to suffer in a country which is claiming it's so prosperous. No poor person is supposed to suffer without having access to the treatment that they need. And Mr. Speaker, Livingston Griffin is not the only one, you know. There's a young lady by the name of Akila Duo. She worked for the government. She had not yet been appointed. Man, Mr. Speaker, if you see that young lady.
What are you calling up people named like that?
She's my friend, I could call her name. She's my family too.
The illness is private.
Shut up. You talk too much. You talk too much.
Out of place.
And so, Mr. Speaker, that young lady could have benefited from universal health insurance. When she went to Antigua, she couldn't access it because there was nothing in place. And so, Mr. Speaker, for those reasons and more, I am an advocate for universal health insurance. Poor people must be able to access the care they need when they need it. And I know why some members will not want me to mention it, you know, because they will want, if I don't mention it, it makes their 20 years when they didn't do it look good. 20 years, you know, they didn't do it. And so because they're talking about it now, they feel bad.
Claiming hemodialysis. How could you claim hemodialysis in this country?
And so, Mr. Speaker, you pay no attention to those who speak without being called upon to speak. And you speak when you are spoken to. and answer when you're called. I am called to speak, and I'm speaking. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am an advocate for universal health. And what has happened, Mr. Speaker, since I did not want it to be no Eugene Hamilton thing? I wanted it to be a Dr. Douglas and a people's thing. I wanted it to be our thing. You know you have medical training, so I value your medical advice. I want it to be our thing. And I'm going to call on you to second the motion, when we bring it in Parliament. I believe you would. And so, Mr. Speaker, universal health will come. In order to do this, Mr. Speaker, I invited the University of the West Indies Health Economics Unit to partner with us. Because I wanted it not to be a Eugene Hamilton thing. And they have partnered with us, Mr. Speaker, as they have partnered with the government of the Virgin Islands, as they partnered with St. Lucia, and they have worked on a green paper. The green paper has been in circulation now for the last 2 months or so, or 3. And at this point, they have purged the members of the commission, headed by Miss Azila Clark, I must say, who is a very astute, bright, smart young lady, who I know that is doing a great job. She has been working at this document, and they have been around the country in consultation throughout the country and on radio, and the white paper will come. When that white paper comes, Mr. Speaker, and the only reason why we have not heard more about it at this particular time is because the actuarial costings have not been completed. I don't want to throw numbers out there before the actuary has done this. But we have ways we'll have to try and fund it. Maybe salary deduction, I don't know. Maybe have an independent lottery in the country, I don't know.
Maybe salary deduction, you're going to take up people's money, you know that.
Also, they want the health. You don't want people to have good health. You prefer to have people sick and dying. You prefer to have people sick and dying than to have them have good health. Can you imagine that? I know that his soul is dead, He has a dead soul. He does not want people to be well at all.
Be upfront, sir. Be upfront.
You understand?
Be upfront.
Come on.
Your soul is dead.
Don't fool anybody.
Your wave have come and gone. Never to return.
Dr. Drew.
And so, Mr. Speaker, universal health coverage will come. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage everyone in the country to embrace the concept of universal health. It is not just a St. Kitts thing, don't get me wrong. This is something that is being encouraged by the World Health Organization, that countries proceed to universal health. It is being encouraged and it's being implemented elsewhere. Taiwan has a great model. We don't have to use the Taiwanese model, but they have a great model. The Cayman Islands. Ms. Clark and her commission went to the Cayman Islands to look at their work there, to the British Virgin Islands. They went and saw and learned some things there. All of that is going in, the learning is going into what is being prepared now. And so when the time comes, Mr. Speaker, I am really looking for the opposition support. I've already told the leader of the opposition that. I am calling on him to second the motion on that one, to make sure that it is our thing. And so, Mr. Speaker,
you will be out.
So, Mr. Speaker, having seen the green paper, it has been on the website of that organization. It has been around the country. It has been all on radio. We are now awaiting the work of an actuary whom we all know. I understand it is Mr. Osborne. I don't think it's Dr. Osborne, who does some work with most of the social security systems in the region, who should be doing some work on the costing of that particular project. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to at least 2 things in agriculture. Mr. Speaker, we have introduced only recently, and I don't know if my honorable friend would like to claim it, but that's all right. He can claim anything he wants. Recognizing, Mr. Speaker, that in 2015, we had perhaps one of the worst years of drought in recent history, which caused a decline of 31% in our agricultural production, a decline. Recognizing that, Mr. Speaker, that climate change is creating havoc around the world, and we're not excluded. Recognizing, Mr. Speaker, that in a year when we were suffering that aridity, our neighbor Dominica was having a deluge of rain causing death. And when you look at those two monsters, Mr. Speaker, you realize, though they may have different characters, they actually cause the same catastrophic result. And so because of that, Mr. Speaker, it set us to think, how do we respond to this phenomenon? How do we do something that can help our farmers? So apart from the fact that there's soil testing going on, we developed a project where we have now installed some meteorological equipment, 3 in St. Kitts and 1 in Nevis. The idea is, Mr. Speaker, that we must gather the kind of data that is relevant to people who are doing farming. A sort of early warning system that will give them data in advance to be able to know when to plant, where to plant, and that kind of thing. That's what we're trying to achieve, Mr. Speaker, because the current data from the Meteorological Office, while they do collect some data, is really not adequate, not sufficient to advise those people who are doing the farming of where to plant, how to plant, and maybe what time or season in which to plant. Because if you look at it, Mr. Speaker, the seasons are really all blurred now. When you should be having rain, you're having sun. When you should be having some sunlight, you're getting rain. And so that is a project on which we have embarked only this year. Only this year embarked upon that project so that every farmer could benefit from the collective information that is gathered from that particular project. We expect, Mr. Speaker, that as a result of this information, of this data gathering, that the farmers will be better informed and that the productivity level could be more sustainable throughout the periods ahead, rather than when we have a 2015 or 2017 and no one really knows what and how it happens. So, Mr. Speaker, that is one of the things that we have embarked upon. And, Mr. Speaker, if I should add, it was only a week ago that 250 farmers and fishers received a grant from the government. The lowest $2,000, the highest $7,000, where we paid out $1 million to those farmers and fishers. Some of those who suffered as a result of the hurricane in 2017, who actually got support from us in the first place, but yet we realize some farmers needed what I will call a top-up. So just last week or week before, we paid out $1 million, helping those farmers, supporting farmers to continue to grow their crops so that we can be fed locally. It helps if we grow more to reduce our import bill, and that is what we hope will be achieved by helping the farmers. And so what else will we be doing for the fishers? Mr. Speaker, the fishermen now, on the other hand, who also participated in that program, the fishermen, Mr. Speaker, have had a few challenges. And I think about 2 years ago, with the sargassum seaweed invading our shores, a boat somewhere in the vicinity of St. Paul's, I think it was, had gone out with 2 guys fishing. And there was an engine that was stalled, I understand, because of the sargassum seaweed. And there was an attempt to try to restart that engine, and whatever happened with a wave knocked them overboard. And the boat, one of the engines was still motoring slightly, kept going away from them. And though they tried to swim and catch the boat, they did not. They eventually had to turn back. And when they did, in that process, one of them drowned. And the other one lived to tell the story. And it was only late last year, Mr. Speaker, one of them, a very good friend of mine, the boat just disappeared, it appears. The only thing that I recall them saying that they found was a life jacket. And 2 guys perished, because it's been about 5-6 months now, and we haven't heard from them. One of them is a very good friend of mine. So what have we decided to do, Mr. Speaker? In February of 2019, the Department of Marine Resources in St. Kitts and Nevis will be distributing a vessel monitoring system, BMS, to registered fishing boat owners. Vessel monitoring system are devices used in fishing to track and monitor the activities of fishing vessels for the safety of the fishers and the regulation of the marine resources. In other words, apart from their own safety, we have an idea of where they are, whether they're really fishing, or whether they're fishing for fish. You see where they go. You can actually identify if they are poaching other people's property. But the main thing is for their safety, so that if something happens, you can quickly get to the position they last was, where they last had been sighted, and perhaps be able to rescue them before they lose their lives. So we'll be embarking on that in February. The cost of each device is $300 US, with an annual monitoring fee of $325 US per device. We are doing that, Mr. Speaker, spending $143,750 US to 156. At the low end is that, and at the higher end, based on the numbers we have, about $156,000 US. We believe it does a lot for the safety of the people who ply our waters, who fish for us, because we have more and more young men who are getting interested, becoming interested and investing in fishing vessels and continuing to go out to fish for us. And so, Mr. Speaker, there are a lot that I could speak about agriculture, but I want to turn to housing, because something was mentioned here in this parliament by another speaker about housing. And for the good of the country, I will read the data that has been made available to me over time, because they have been publishing that over 5,000 houses were built under the former administration. That's what they've been publishing.
How much is it? 5, 6?
Over 5,000 houses, they say.
6,000 then?
And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to read the data for you. Because, Mr. Speaker, between 1996 and 2000, the number showing up here on the register documentation with NHC, and I'm talking the NHC figures, because that's what they said. Is NHC, they said NHC build them. 430, and in 2000 to 2002, 50. Super low income houses in 2003 to 2006, 393. Townhouses between 2006 and 2008, 35. NEMA houses 2008 to 2010, 170. HS 500 2009 to 2012, 467. XSSMC 2009 to 2011, 241. Building assistance 33. Somebody get help for one. 2013 to 2016, 19. 30 individual bungalows.
2013 to what?
2013 to 2016.
You gave them some in man.
What?
2016. You give them some?
In 2013 to 2016, we have another 96.
16 is awesome.
Now, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker. The figure, Mr. Speaker, that we have here, and break it down a bit more. Mortgage by NHC, 1945. Mortgage by NTB, whatever that is, 134. Mortgage by Development Bank, NBT, I know what it means. It means National Bank. Silly. You don't know what it is? Mortgage by Development Bank, 105. Freeze, 24. The total is 2,208. So it's a false claim for them to publish 5,000. It's a false claim for them to publish 5,000.
That's Labour-matics.
So, Mr. Speaker, what are we doing? What are we doing, Mr. Speaker? Here we are, Mr. Speaker. If you go in the country today and look at the construction of houses done by NHC, you wouldn't even recognize it's an NHC house. You know why? Because, Mr. Speaker, it is an enhanced house fit for a king. It is a house that's fit for a king. It is a house, Mr. Speaker, with rooms that are bigger, that not only a bed can hold in it, but dressing table as well. Before time, your bed couldn't turn around in your house. But now you can have a dressing table in there. It is a house, Mr. Speaker, that bathroom is bigger. Much bigger bathroom. There's a space inside you could exercise in your bathroom if you want. It's a house, Mr. Speaker. If you look at the gallery with that nice railing done by somebody from St. Peter's, who is not necessarily... Anyway, let me don't say that part. But it is a good, lovely railing on the side. It is a house, Mr. Speaker, that... You look at the roof. No shingles anymore. We go on to galvalume. A hard roof.
Step up.
Less likely to be damaged in a hurricane than the shingles. I'm just speaking the truth. The truth is that it is a hard roof. And you know what? It's done by local people.
Yes.
Who bought equipment in the country and making those galvalume.
Right here?
Right here. That's what it is, Mr. Speaker.
Smaller and cost more.
And then, Mr. Speaker, you know what is even more? It must cost more. You think of building in 1998 when you 1998 when you build a house for 50,000. 1998 they were building a house for 50,000. Build a house for 50,000. Charge you $500 a month for 30 years. Make you pay $180,000 for a $50,000 house. That's what they were doing. And so, Mr. Speaker, now, do you know how low we got an interest rate? As low as 2%.
Oh, Lord.
Never in the history of this country. 2% interest to poor people.
0%.
Mr. Speaker. And that is what it is. And you know what's even more attractive, Mr. Speaker? I'm going to take you, Mr. Speaker, to some areas in the country. And I'm going to tell you, see if you see a low-income house, an NHC house, and you will see it and you won't know it. Because it's different.
Smaller and
it's different. It leaves room for expansion. It leaves room for growth and development. So when your family gets older, you don't have to talk about, you don't have no room.
Yes.
You can grow.
Making provision for
That's where we are, Mr. Speaker.
children and grandchildren.
Housing revolution
housing revolution
in this country. That is what it is, Mr. Speaker.
Good, Jim. Go ahead.
Eugene, that one in the middle.
Of course it is.
He's laughing at you, man.
Batting real good.
Housing revolution with 100
Mr. Speaker,
but me tell you they're going to give us now I tell you
Doing well. I'm not trying to
Mr. Speaker, by the time we get to 2019, we would have completed 300 solutions under the Housing Solution Program. And we will be embarking on another set of houses. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? There are those who frown. While we are in government, Over 2,000 people get a house to fix it up.
Yeah.
They seem not to know that. Over 2,000 people who are not getting any water in the house anymore. When rain fall or when dew fall. Because the only thing you can do is fall. That's the only thing you can do, fall.
Say do? Jew?
Fall, yeah. That's the only thing you can do, fall.
Why Jew not
Why you
even
falling? Jew gonna fall.
Jew not even fall?
When you come like you didn't hear me.
You can fall.
So, Mr. Speaker,
Jew ain't started yet.
those houses will be built. In 2019, they'll be completed. And over 2,000 people across the entire country. It mattered not whether they were back in unity or not.
Yes.
Everybody took Mum Salmon Bagay.
That's the point. That's the point.
Got their household fixed.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, some people claim more on the other side get their house fixed than on this side. That's what people claim.
Government for all.
A government for all, that's what we are. Government for all, for everybody. On top of that, Mr. Speaker.
Government for all.
Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker. We embarked on a health program. You know why, Mr. Speaker? As I mentioned earlier, people without bathroom and toilet facilities and so on. And here. So far, we have 443 people under the new program, because there was a program before this one, where over 600 people got help. But this new program, where we decided to invest $2 million, $2 million. 443 people applied in the last year. 163 of them got help. Either bathroom fix, roof fix, something done to the house that improved the quality of their life.
Yes.
Because of what was going on in the NEMA program, 39 of them had to be referred to NEMA. And they got help on the NEMA. We have, Mr. Speaker, another quantity to be completed. And the first tranche of money, I said 2 million, 1 million which we receive is done. And at this point, Mr. Speaker, we are just getting the other tranche. And those persons who are out there, who have the applications with us for help, could be assured that in the same manner in which those before have been helped, they too will benefit from our help program. And so I want to assure you, Mr. Speaker, and those persons out there, that help is on its way. Mr. Speaker, I promised to make an announcement today, but I think I'm going to hold it back, but I will probably whet your appetite anyway.
You hold us to when you
But that what you just said?
Same time, we're going to know to buy in.
No, spend the work. You tired?
Listen here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they will want to know what it is, see? They so will want to know what it is. The only person I can tell is my friend from number 11. I ain't going to tell you.
No, you can tell me.
No, I'll tell your friend from number 11.
It's a secret to them.
Speaker time.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Last year, we embarked on a program of cleaning up the country. It was on September 21st that the program began. We placed bins in every village in this country, encouraging persons to clean up, to remove all the debris, the garbage which they dump sometimes on the side or in the bushes, and to take them to the dump. And you know what we did, Mr. Speaker? We did it, and we did not charge anyone for doing it. We did it, Mr. Speaker, clean up the country. And, Mr. Speaker, following up on that, we offered those persons with derelict vehicles the opportunity to move your derelict vehicles to the landfill free of cost. Because we believe, Mr. Speaker, that the derelict vehicles that are strewn around the country is creating a health hazard for us. They are collecting water. It's an opportunity for mosquitoes to breed. And you know, mosquitoes carry around vector-borne diseases. And we have to be careful. We know what chikungunya did when we learned of it here. We know about Zika. We know about some of those diseases, dengue and the like. And so this initiative was introduced to encourage persons to remove their derelict vehicles from where they are located between bushes and near your home. Take them to the landfill where you don't have to pay to dispose of them. And Mr. Speaker, we have gone a bit further. And we have engaged a firm, a team, to continue that program to remove those that people will not remove. Applying the law. And taking them to the landfill to reduce their size and to eventually ship them out of here. Because, Mr. Speaker, you know, cars are very cheap on this internet. And some people just buy a car, and shortly after they buy it, it doesn't work. And usually they just get abandoned. So we recognize that there is a challenge, a health hazard brewing. And we have introduced this to encourage persons to remove those vehicles, to help us to be proactive about health. There are some who will always talk about the reactive side of health. I prefer to talk about the proactive side, to be preventative. That is why I talked about the kidney program, the kidney disease program, the CKP program. That is why I spoke about that. In the same way I'm saying, we are being proactive about health by encouraging people to remove these debris from around the place, which can create a nest for mosquitoes and help to spread diseases. We are being proactive. It is why, again, Mr. Speaker, in my talk, in my discussion and discourse about universal health, I am challenging those who are nutritionists in our country, challenging those who are chiropractors or naturopaths. I am calling for and will recommend the amendment to the Medical Act so as to include chiropractors and naturopaths as part of our service delivery for health. Because we focus too heavily on the allopathic path of health. And that is why I believe sometimes there's a different course that can be taken. I know my honorable member from number 6 understands that and believes that. That we have to do more than just look from it from an allopathic point of view. Yes, most people are trained that way. But the naturopaths and the chiropractors should have a voice to create a more holistic approach to dealing with people's health. And so, you want me to stop? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, our approach is a holistic one. Our approach is a preventative one. Our approach is one which puts people in a position to avoid becoming sick unnecessarily. And our approach is also that if you do, in the unlikely event you do get sick, that you can get services wherever they are, rather than to be out there pining away and dying an aimless death. Mr. Speaker, I'm really wrapping up, but even before you wrap up, I'm going to be allow you to continue.
Members, I find it very discourteous and disrespectful to the chair that there are persons in here who are attempting to indicate that I am in some way giving an honorable member more time that he's allotted. I have made a note of the time when he started. He began at 11:57. According to that watch, his time would expire at 1:27. If you take a look at the clock, it is now saying 1:27. That is 90 minutes. Please do not be shouting out things or saying things to give an impression that I am showing favoritism to a member. It is not right. I am keeping time. My clerk is keeping time. She has just sent me a note. We're on the same time. I was about to indicate to the member. Please stop giving that false impression to persons who are not here, who can witness and just hearing you. It's not good. Stop disrespecting the chair. Honourable member, your time has expired. Your allotment of 90 minutes has expired.
I request another 5 minutes, which I don't think I will use, but I request another 5 minutes. Just to wrap up.
The question is that the member has requested an additional 5 minutes. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes.
Thank you, Mr.
5 minutes.
Speaker. Thank you so much. I want to just use the next few minutes, Mr. Speaker, to wrap up. And in wrapping up, I just want to give the country this message, that while the leader of the opposition came to this parliament to persuade you that it's time to come back to him and make him Prime Minister again,
Come back to him.
I want to remind the country that there is a tide in the affairs of men. Taken at the flood leads to fortune. The honourable member, President Christopher Nine, understood that and moved a motion of no confidence in 2012. And the tide began to rise. The Prime Minister of the country understood it and said, come out from among them and come in at this. And the tide continues to rise. And Mr. Speaker, if you look around, double salary, contribution to agriculture people, $500 a month, the tide is still rising. How then can anyone invite you to come back to a tide that is fizzled out? You can't go on a tide that's fizzled out. And so, Mr. Speaker, the reason I mention that is because I want to remind the people of this country that when one seeks to get power without apologizing for his misconduct, that he must remember that the country needs no one whose soul is dead.
You're right. You're right.
As I remind, and I will then close with what I began. That Sir Walter Scott reminds us that breeds there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself has said, this is my land, my native land, whose heart hath near within him burned as home his footstep he had turned from Dominica.
Such poetry. Turned from where?
Dominica.
Dominica?
From wandering on a foreign strand. If such there breathe, go mark him well. For him no minstrel raptures swell. High though his titles, proud his name, boundless his wealth as wish can claim, despite those titles, power and pelf, the wretched concentrate all in self. Living shall forfeit fair renown, and doubly dying shall go down to the vile dust from whence he sprung.
What a joker, what a joker.
Unwept, unhonored, and unsung. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.